researchers. How's everything going? How are you guys doing? Hope you guys are all keeping well, staying well right now. That's going to be something we're going to have to be doing for the foreseeable future. I got a question today texted to me by somebody from Guru Nation. I don't know this person, but apparently been having a few texts with them. And so anybody can do that, by the way. 949-415-6256. Text me. Also Instagram, whatever. All the links are underneath the show notes of this video or on the podcast. So I wanted to take this question. There's actually three questions that are all part of a greater theme and expand on them. Like, kind of give my thoughts more in depth. So before we get into the video, as you might know from the title, this is about jobs and making your CV look better. So getting jobs, making your CV look better. Basically, if you're a site owner, this may not interest you. But if you are somebody wanting to get in the industry or somebody already in the industry, kind of like this person, and just wants to keep building their career, take it to the next level, this is exactly what you need to hear. At least I think. So let me go through because I know this is why I like these questions because it's not just this person who has these questions. For every one of her, there's probably 10 people that don't text me that are thinking the same things, right? So this is like 10x, a way to 10x people's questions, right? But I'd love for all of you guys to text me your questions anyway. So let me just read it. There's three parts. Let me read the first part. Okay. Hey Dan, hope you're doing well. I have a few questions. Feel free to use them in your podcast or YouTube. Thank you very much. I will. So, number one, if a person takes classes on Coursera, what exactly can you add to your CV, or is it just for your own knowledge? So, very good question. Okay, I guess before I get into all three of these questions, the theme here is you don't need permission to develop your career. This is your career development is your responsibility, and you don't need permission from anyone else. So if you're working as a coordinator somewhere, you don't need to ask your employer, "Hey, can I take this Coursera class?" I mean, you just do it. Now, don't do it while you're on the job or while you're supposed to be working, but you don't need to ask permission, okay? So, same thing with after you take the class, you can add it to your CV. Okay, you can add the course to your CV. The reason I like Coursera, and I know there's other ones, but I haven't actually done those other ones. So I talk about Coursera because I've actually done it. What I like about Coursera is that the courses are usually free. They're usually good too. Like I took a breast cancer course from Yale, so there it was free, but then I actually wanted the certificate. So at the end of the course, if you want the certificate, you could pay like 49 bucks. Every program has a different fee for the certificate. Not all of them are free. But to answer this person's questions, if you take classes on Coursera, what exactly can you add to your CV, or is it just for your own knowledge? So number one, it's always just for your own knowledge. But number two, of course, you can add it to your CV. Your CV, if it doesn't, you need to add it, should have a certification section, like where GCP would go, where IATA certification would go, any other certifications you have. I mean, think about all the studies, all the certifications you do for your studies that you're working on. There's so many vendors. There's EDC certifications in addition to GCP and IATA. Those should actually go in your certification section on your CV. All right, so the way I do it for my students in the CRA Academy, because I actually do all of their CVs when they graduate, if they come to California for the internship, uh, I'll do their CVs personally. And what I do, of course, you have the name, you have their skills, you have their work experience, then you have education, broken down. And you need to do the same thing. Like if you don't have it already, you should have it. You should have that section. So of course, the more things you do to enhance yourself and the more things you can do to make yourself more attractive to a potential employer, you need to add these things to your CV, right? And you don't need any permission for number one. to do that. It's your CV, it's your career. Of course, you can add it to your resume um, under certifications. Okay, number two, question two. Since I work at a site conducting coordinating studies on the lab end, but work very closely with CRCs, could I include it on my CV as an internship? Do I need to formally shadow them? So there's a couple ways to go about this, okay? You already work at the site, so you're on the lab end, but you work very closely with the CRCs. So depending on what you do, you can actually put your job responsibilities as well as all the other things that maybe don't fall under the scope of your responsibilities, but things that you actually do, if it's the truth, on your CV. So there's a skills section. When I do the resume for my CRA Academy students, skills go on the top. And if you, for example, have the skill of consenting patients or pre screening patients, add that as a skill to the top. Now, if you want to have it more formal, because maybe you're worried, okay, if I put this skill on the top of my CV and then I put my resume out there and then the potential employer contacts my employer, my current employer, and asks them if I did these things. Well, if you actually did do these things, then they should say yes, but maybe that person doesn't know that you were doing things outside of your job responsibility. Okay, so how, the question now becomes how do you put these skills that you've developed that are not your official job responsibilities on your CV? And I say just put them on there. And if the employer, the new employer, contacts your old employer and asks to verify that you did do those things, and if there's ever confusion, they're going to ask you, hey, your employer said you didn't do this. And then you can explain, no, it wasn't part of my job responsibility, but I did do it. Or you can even put it to erase even more confusion because it does get confusing, and I get why this is probably your biggest challenge for all three questions. This is the biggest potential issue because you're depending on your current employer to know what you're actually doing. Unfortunately, many of them don't even know what their own employees are doing. Sad state we're in, but some of these big AMCs, academic medical centers, I know, I feel your pain. So, what you can do is under your work experience, there's a description underneath each job. So, you can put on there all your job responsibilities, and then you can even write a few sentences. I I conducted these assessments, or I also assisted in these job functions which were outside of my job responsibility, but ended up becoming part of my weekly, you know, whatever the case may be, or daily activities. So you can actually clarify that on your resume. Now, you can of course do that and ask your current employer, hey, do you have like a formal shadowing like internship thing? Because here's what I'm doing. I'm already doing these things. Let's say you say that you're working in the lab, but you're also working closely with coordinators. So what does that actually mean? Are you seeing patients sometimes? Are you helping them out with EDC data entry? There's nothing wrong with going to your employer and telling them, "Hey, I'm already doing all these things. Like I'm putting them on my CV right now, but is there like a formal training program that I should take to do this, or is there a formal internship program? Usually at these AMCs, they have one of those two things, right? Like a training program or an internship program, even for their own employees. If they say no, then you're back to square one, which is what I suggested, just putting it on your CV anyways and explaining it under your work experience that, hey, this is not necessarily my daily job responsibility, but it ended up being something I was doing on a daily basis in addition to my job responsibilities. So that's something you can do. You can add to your CV to clarify that. So that's the trickiest one because it depends on your employer. But even that is not so tricky because, again, your career development is your responsibility and your CV is your responsibility. And as long as you're communicating it clearly, and that's something you can even explain in your cover letter. Hey, while my job while my official job title was lab such and such, I also worked hand in hand with many coordinators, and these are some of the things that I did, and these are also reflected in my CV. That's one way to go about it. Of course, if you can get the employer on your side, even better. Okay, but then you should still put it in your cover letter. Number three, I think largely an issue in clinical research is that people don't know what they can include on their resume. If they've learned a skill, but it isn't a part of their job responsibilities, they have a tendency to leave it out. For example, I learned RedCap, Encore, and Epic because my department hosts the training, but I do not use it. Should I include this on my resume? So I don't know what red I do know what Epic is. That's for medical billing. And RedCap. So I know from your text that you work at an academic medical center because these are things that smaller sites don't use. These are things that academic medical centers use. So yes, of course, under certifications, you want to list all the certifications you have if they're in any way relevant to healthcare. Now, if you took a course, like I'll use my example, okay? I'm obviously in the healthcare space. I took course on Coursera on finance, and I also took another course outside of Coursera on Bitcoin and on blockchain technology. Now, finance, so far, like because I'm a contract CRA as well as a site owner, that has no relevance to my contract CRA work, okay, or any of my other positions in research. The finance one might, if I am involved in finance, like for example at a site level, right? Contract and budget negotiator or grant administrator, then that becomes more relevant. So you got to always look at, okay, how relevant are these certifications to what I'm currently doing? If you can't rationalize even like a general way that that these certifications connect to the job you have or the job you want, I say leave them out. But if there's any way, and like use your brain here, like use some common sense, if there's any way that you think these things can somehow be related to the job you have or the job you want to get, you should put them in there. Okay, but I absolutely agree with you. It is a very large issue in research, especially, I want to say especially at large academic medical centers, that people don't know what they can include on their resume. Because you guys at AMCs, I mean, not to like harp on this too much, but you guys at AMCs are told exactly what you can and cannot do on a daily basis. So it's natural reaction for you to not want to put things on your CV, even though they're things that are true and that you do on a daily basis, just because your CV has to go through these departments and they have to look at it, okay? But you can always have a CV that you're sending out to prospective employers, and you can have your CV, if you don't want to cause problems, have a separate CV just for the institution that you work at. If that's what's the problem for you and for other people, you should do it. But your CV is your responsibility. Your career development is your responsibility, nobody else's. You don't need to ask permission to put things on your resume. You can always explain things with a cover letter. You can always explain things in more depth on the actual CV, where there's a section where you could write a brief summary of what you've done at each job, at each work experience. So you can then put things that you are not under your job responsibilities, but things that you still do on a regular basis. Right? That's what CVs are for. And that's exactly what cover letters are for as well, to explain anything that makes you stand out more. So certifications like RedCap, Encore, and Epic, I would say put them on there because they're obviously relevant to your current job because your department hosts the training, even though you don't use it. What if you apply to a job? Let's say you take the route where you don't add these things to your CV because you currently are not using them, but you have the certifications. So now you apply to a job and you don't even realize, but they actually prefer people who have Epic training because their new EMRs are somehow integrated with Epic. Okay, there's like complicated stuff, but they would really prefer people who have Epic uh, experience, but you don't put it on your CV because, as you say, I don't use it. So now you just potentially are missing out on an opportunity because these people have no way of reading your mind, like morphing into your CV and telepathically figuring out what you've done. They have no way of knowing. Like, this is what cover letters are for, this is what CVs are for. And yes, if you get lucky enough to get interviewed, you can then tell them, "Oh, that's good that you're in, that's great that you're needing somebody who's certified in Epic, because even though it's not on my CV, I have done the certification, but I've never used it because, in my job I didn't need to use it." So now, like, you're basically at the mercy of them wanting to bring you in for an interview. But the challenge in getting jobs is to get to the interview, to get the recruiter's attention from your CV and from your cover letter. So again, the rule of thumb is, if it's in any way relevant to your current job or a job you want to get, put it on there. When in doubt, put it on there. The example I used earlier of my Bitcoin course and my blockchain course, I currently do not have it on my CV, but that's because I haven't updated my CV in a while. I'm actually debating putting it on there. Now, here's what I left off of my current CV. I'm a licensed realtor as well, but I don't practice, but I do maintain my license each time it needs to be renewed because I'm a real estate investor and I want to get involved in more and more investing as my career goes on. I don't think that's relevant in any way to monitoring or to getting more CRO projects for myself, so I don't put the realtor on my CV. But I do think, interestingly enough, blockchain, maybe even Bitcoin, will have a place. Possibly, I know blockchain for sure is going to have a place in clinical research. So that is, even though it's not related maybe to any positions now, I think in 5, 10 years it might be, and it's good to have that on there. So a lot of this, you got to use common sense. You got to actually think outside the box. And I know it's tough for people working at AMCs because you're not used to thinking outside the box. You're actually penalized for thinking outside the box. But that's nonsense when it comes to your own career and your own career development, because prospective employers will penalize you for you not meeting their criteria because you left things off of your CV, right? So always, I guess, err on the side of adding it to your CV, unless it's just completely not related, like my example with real estate, of being a realtor. And I don't see any way that that's related to clinical research at all. Even if, let's say, I was going to apply to be a site director and this site wants to buy real estate, I mean, it's just a stretch. It's a stretch. But blockchain, I could see, obviously, things like breast cancer, I could see as being important. I'm thinking of taking another couple of courses on Coursera, healthcare related. I'm going to add those. The finance course I'm going to take, I will add, because again, contracts and budgets, grants administrators, you never know. You never know. And I'm at the stage where I'm not actually looking for employment, but I am a consultant, so I am looking for consulting gigs. And again, I'm always a believer in being a generalist. So some consulting gigs require a little bit of financial knowledge, a little bit of grants knowledge. So if I have that course from Coursera on finance, it's going to look good on my resume, right? In addition to everything else. So a lot of this is just common sense, outside the box thinking, but very good questions. I guess the theme to wrap this up is the same theme as how I started it. You don't need anyone's permission to build your CV and to grow your career. That's your responsibility. If you're working at an academic center where they don't want all this crazy stuff on your resume, then that's fine. You have your resume that they're going to use. But for you to grow your career and develop your career, you should be having another CV, if that's the case, where you do list all these things, all these extra things, because that's what those employers care about. Your current employer doesn't care about you getting another job. Matter of fact, they don't want you to get another job. They want you to stay there, right? So that's why it's your responsibility. It's your responsibility to make your resume and your skills look attractive for prospective employers. So hopefully that helps. Thank you so much for watching and listening and sending in your questions. Keep them coming. 949-415-6256. I also respond very quickly on Instagram. Username is Dan Sfera. Take care.